You guys, listen to this bullshit.
On this 29th of February, Jeff Glor of CBS This Morning Saturday has a story for us. And we must say it's about time.
In a quarter. The Julian calendar in 46 BC was the first to add a leap day every 4 years. But it still wasn't quite right. That led to the Gregorian calendar, which set the leap year pattern we've used since the 16th century. But some think it's high time for another big change.
Some would call it arrogance, bars for the righteous, and they like, who the hell is this? Goat metaphors, pen game, yeah, I never miss delivery from heaven, but you can feel a hell in this. Since I keep the Luni-Solar, they say that I rock with Satan. Meanwhile, they keep Shabbat on the calendar that's pagan. Sabbath not on Saturday, sorry, they lied to you. You following the system that was made in 1582. Regardless, I'm a brute, so I gotta rep my father. Had to climb up to the mount to be closer to my Abba. It's lonely.
It's your boy Solemn Prophet. This isn't Shabbat talk yet. That'll be in about an hour or so. But I wanted to quickly bring this to you guys' attention. As you saw in the intro, right? They doing some things. They making some changes. They trying to edit the calendar yet again, right? And this is why, if nothing else, this is why you need to hold close to the Most High's calendar. All of these changes, all of these implementations, all of these edits, all of these alterations, right? You don't need all of that. Follow the Most High's calendar, you'll be on point. Not only with your daily count, but your weekly count, your monthly count, your yearly count, your Sabbaths, your feast days, everything. You're going to be in complete alignment with the Most High's timeline. All right. So, with that being said, I know y'all saw the intro. It was real crazy. We're going to get right into that full video, and then we're going to come back and we're going to commentary. We're going to talk, you know what I'm saying? We're going to chop it up. And I'm going to throw a couple other videos in here too to show you just how messed up the current calendar system is.
You guys, listen to this bullshit.
On this 29th of February, Jeff Glor of CBS This Morning Saturday has a story for us. And we must say it's about time.
Since the beginning, humankind has been obsessed with tracking time. And nearly every civilization has tried to squeeze that time into an accurate calendar. But for thousands of years, we were missing one crucial element.
Time keeps on slipping.
The leap year.
I think that time is very confusing sometimes when you have to think about it.
Jackie Faherty is an astrophysicist at the American Museum of Natural History's Hayden Planetarium in New York City. When people think about the day, February 29th, what should they think about?
We're placing a human construct around what is an astronomical phenomenon of the Earth moving around the sun.
The calendar we use includes leap years because of how long it really takes the Earth to orbit the sun, which is not 365 days. It's about 365 and a quarter. The Julian calendar in 46 BC was the first to add a leap day every 4 years, but it still wasn't quite right. That led to the Gregorian calendar, which set the leap year pattern we've used since the 16th century. But some think it's high time for another big change.
You guys have been working on this calendar for how long?
Decades.
And so far,
Nada.
Enter Dick Henry and Steve Hankey, professors at Johns Hopkins University, and the biggest current backers of a brand new calendar, one that eliminates leap years and also standardizes the days and weeks to always be the same each year.
January 1 is always on a Monday, forever.
Forever.
In addition to starting every year on a Monday, the Hankey-Henry permanent calendar would also set your birthday and the holidays to the same day of the week every year, except October 31st, which along with all Friday the 13th would vanish. In place of leap years, every 5 or 6 years, an extra week is inserted at the end of December. Sort of an extended Christmas vacation.
There's no such thing as a perfect calendar. You just think this is better than what we have now.
Ours is very close to perfect.
We have current calendar. Every year, the thing jerks around by a day or two.
But aren't quirks and eccentricities part of the human existence?
We could make things worse and then you'd be happier.
Calendar changes, people I think are resistant to because of what it means from the infrastructure of how we all live our lives. The Earth doesn't really care what day you call it. It's
Okay, so it's so it's so crazy. It makes me just want to laugh. But I had to take notes. Okay, I had to take notes because I want to point out some things with this calendar, y'all. First, some professors at Johns Hopkins University came up with this. All right, it's the calendar. The calendar is called the Hanke Henry calendar, named after its creators, Steve Hanke and Dick Henry. You know, these professors. All right. Hanke Henry calendar. So every year is going to start on a Monday, according to this calendar. They've been working on it for decades. It says it eliminates the leap year. It standardizes the weeks and the months. So the like birthdays and holidays will always be on the same day of the week each year. It doesn't change. It doesn't move. It eliminates October 31st or Halloween. And it says, and it eliminates all Friday the 13th. But it adds an extra week at the end of December for like an extra holiday week. But this is what they're doing. And you know what? Looking back at history, how the Roman calendars were set up, looking at how the Julian calendar was set up, looking at how the Gregorian calendar was set up, I wouldn't be surprised if this actually catches traction and is accepted by mainstream media and eventually the society as a whole. This is the type of stuff that they're talking about. Daniel spoke of these types of things happening when he says that they will seek to change times and laws, right? We already know that they change times. And actually, speaking of Daniel, we're going to get into some more videos confirming this. Is gonna give us information about the Roman calendar. It's gonna give us information about the Gregorian calendar and how those things have changed. It's so bad that we're gonna watch a video where we're gonna literally see, going back, if you're trying to do your research, going back, seeing 2 different dates in history because of the changes that they tried to make, which is absolutely crazy. But before we get to all of that, let me just address this calendar. Like I said, things like this needs to show you that no matter what, you have to adhere to the Most High's calendar, his timeline. So for my people who keep Shabbat according to the Gregorian calendar, because basically all you're doing is you're keeping the Shabbat according to whatever calendar the world accepts. That's just being real. The world accepts the Gregorian right now, and you're using the Gregorian to keep the Sabbath. That's just facts. Because the Gregorian calendar created the Sunday through Saturday calendar system, or Monday through Sunday, however you look at it, right? And so you guys choose Saturday because it is the 7th day on the Gregorian calendar. So my question to you guys, if this gets implemented, are you then going to keep it on Saturday according to this new calendar? Even though Saturday on this calendar may not align with the Saturday that was on the Gregorian calendar. Right? Because it's not about the specific day in which you worship. It's about the calendar you use. Because if you are observing Shabbat on the 7th day according to the calendar you have, but that 7th day isn't consistently the 7th day according to the Most High's calendar, then are you really truly keeping the 7th day? And that's the whole point behind this. A lot of people have been coming into the knowledge of the truth regarding the Most High's calendar. So all praises to the Most High for that. A lot of people have been realizing that, yeah, these calendars, not only are they pagan, they're incorrect. They're man-made and they have so many flaws. It's ridiculous. And so people have begun research. People have begun asking questions. And a good portion of people, especially in some truth communities, right, are coming to the realization that you got to keep the Most High's calendar. And it's right there in Genesis. It's right there in Genesis. It's sprinkled throughout the rest of the 66 books. It's in the Apocrypha. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's in the Book of Enoch. It's in the Book of Jasher. It's in the Book of Jubilees. It's everywhere, right? So this calendar that you guys just saw is trash. It's trash. And get ready, because like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they implement this. So what are you gonna do? Are you gonna adhere to this calendar, the Hanky Henry calendar? Or are you gonna keep keeping the Pope Gregory the 13th calendar? Oh, I'm sorry, the Gregorian calendar, the Greco-Roman calendar. I don't know, but let's get right into it. Let's look into some history, because this brother right here, he's so passionate about history. Let's look into the history of the Roman calendar and the Gregorian calendar, and then we'll get into another video.
Here's an interesting question of historical trivia. What important historical event occurred on September 5th of 1752 in England? If you don't immediately know, you can try to divine it from the period. George II was King of England. Henry Pelham was Prime Minister. England was not technically at war, but they were conducting a proxy war against the French on the Indian subcontinent. And in the colonies, Ben Franklin conducted his famous electricity experiment with his kite earlier in the year in 1752. And if you still don't know what important event happened on September 5th, it's in fact a trick question. No historical events of any importance occurred in England on September 5th of 1752, and we know that because there was no September 5th in England in 1752. And the reason why is a story that deserves to be remembered. And so the Calendar Act of 1750 moved England to what was, in effect, the Gregorian calendar without actually using that name. To facilitate the change and sync with their neighbors, 11 days had to be removed from the calendar in 1752 to account for the effect of nearly 18 centuries of Julius Caesar's 0.2% miscalculation. Citizens of England went to bed on September 2nd, 1752, and woke up the next day on September 14th. Nothing happened on September 5th because there was no September 5th. In addition to moving England to the Gregorian calendar, the Calendar Act of 1750 also made the official start of the new year in England January 1st. Prior to the Calendar Act, the new year actually started in England on March 25th. England was by no means the last country to move to the Gregorian calendar. Sweden, for example, tried to start moving gradually, starting in 1700 and taking out a day a year, but that resulted in a period where they were off of both the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar, and so they gave that up, and they didn't end up making the change actually until a year after England, when in 1753 they just made a short February. Many Eastern European countries didn't actually make the move until the 20th century. In Russia, for example, the move was not made until after the October Revolution of 1917. And ironically, when the dates are adjusted, the October Revolution didn't occur until November. Some nations today still use the Julian calendar to determine things like religious holidays, but use the Gregorian calendar for civil business. Notably, former Protestant and Orthodox countries adopted the solar part of the Gregorian calendar, but they rejected the lunar part, which was used to determine the date of Easter. Instead, they use a completely different calculation that comes to the exact same answer, but doesn't give credit to a Catholic pope. And while it might seem a historical triviality to say that nothing happened in England between September 4th and September 13th of 1752 because they skipped those 11 days, it is undoubtedly extremely useful that despite all our other disagreements, the vast majority of the world at least agrees on today's date.
That's your calendar, man. That's your calendar. You see it. There was no September 5th because they had skipped forward in time. Went to sleep one night, woke up. It's kind of like daylight savings, except instead of an hour you losing, you just go forward a dang near 2 weeks. Oh man, hey, I can't make this stuff up. I can't make this stuff up. And don't worry, we're gonna have multiple witnesses from multiple accounts in this video, because I am not just gonna show you one type of video. And all of these people believe in the Gregorian, the Julian, they're historians, they're scholars and all of that, and they don't have a horse in this race. So I'm not going to other sources who believe in the Luni-Solar, who keep the Luni-Solar like I do. I'm going to people like you guys. So are you gonna question your calendar now? No? Maybe a couple of these other videos might answer some questions for you. Let's go back to the origin, like the Julian calendar. If that makes sense. Let's go to the Julian calendar.
So in 46 BC, Julius Caesar consulted a Greek astronomer named Sosigenes of Alexandria to create a better calendar. The new calendar divided a 365-day year into 12 months, with some months 31 days and some 30, but retaining the shortened 28-day February. But an intercalation was still required to keep the calendar in sync, and so one additional day was added to February every 4 years. The so-called Julian calendar was used by edict throughout the empire, but it still had a flaw. The average length of a year on the Julian calendar is 365.25 days, but a solar year is actually slightly shorter, 365.2425 days, a difference of 3 days every 400 years, or about 0.2%. That seems small, but over enough time it became a problem, and was most noticeable in terms of a specific religious holiday, Easter. Easter is the most important Christian feast, and its date traditionally was determined based on a solar event, the vernal equinox. But the date was actually fixed by the calendar, and Caesar's 0.2% discrepancy meant that over 1600 years later, Easter was no longer landing where Easter had traditionally been celebrated by early Christians relative to the vernal equinox. And so, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a calendar reform called the Gregorian calendar that adjusted the Julian calendar so that rather than a leap year every 4 years, every year that was exactly divisible by 4 would be a leap year, except for years that were exactly divisible by 100. But those centurial years are leap years if they are exactly divisible by 400. And so, for example, the year 2000 should have been a leap year because 2000 is evenly divisible by 4, but should not have been a leap year because 2000 is evenly divisible by 100, but was a leap year because 2000 is evenly divisible by 400. The Gregorian calendar is the calendar most commonly used, at least for civil purposes, throughout the world today. But there was still a problem.
That was the Roman calendar and how it evolved into the Julian calendar, and how it evolved into the Gregorian calendar real quick in a nutshell. But this next video is going to focus solely on the Gregorian calendar and give you that full history preview in about 2 minutes. All right. And then after that, we're going to show you how you can get 2 different dates if you look back in history. And then we'll close it with this historian guy, how he is aware of the Luni-Solar, believe it or not. Let's check it out.
The date. The 4th of October, 1582. On this day, Pope Gregory XIII initiated the Gregorian calendar. Today, the Gregorian calendar, also sometimes referred to as the Christian calendar, is the most widely used in the world. Before the Gregorian calendar was adopted, much of the Christian world used the Julian calendar, which had been in use since 45 years before Christ. Christian leaders wanted to keep Easter tied to spring, however began to see a drift in Easter's placement due to its date being governed by the vernal equinox, and the Julian calendar's gaining of 1 day on the tropical or solar year every 128 years. Although the Julian calendar uses a leap year system very much like the Gregorian calendar, the Gregorian system omits a leap year, a year with an extra day occurring every 4 years, every 400 years. The Julian calendar averages out at being 365.25 days long, which is actually several minutes longer than the tropical calendar. In comparison, the Gregorian calendar is on average 365.2425 days long. This minute difference means that instead of gaining an extra day, in comparison to the tropical year, every 128 years, the Gregorian calendar instead gains a day only every 3,226 years. As well as being 10 minutes and 48 seconds shorter than the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar also skipped 10 days to compensate for the drift, meaning Thursday the 4th of October, 1582, was followed by Friday, the 15th of October, 1582. Although named the Gregorian calendar, after then Pope Gregory XIII, the forms were largely based on modifications suggested by Aloysius Lilius and authored by he and Christopher Clavius. The calendar was at first adopted only by Catholic countries, but went on to become common use in Protestant countries too, and later by almost every country in the world.
Totally mad. Now, going back to what I said about how some countries didn't take on the Gregorian calendar in 1582 and carried on using the Julian calendar, I can imagine that being very confusing for people like merchants, navigators and diplomats who travelled between countries that used different calendars. It was a totally different date if you moved, across a border. It's also confusing for historians and researchers using archives from different countries after the 1582 change of calendar, as dates would differ, for example, between England and other European countries. As historical novelist Kate Emerson points out on her website, English reports on the Spanish Armada of 1588 record events as taking place 10 days earlier than Spanish reports do. So you have to bear that in mind when you're using English sources and Spanish sources. Benjamin Woolley, in his book on John Dee, the Queen's Conjurer, explains that communications during the period between 1582 and 1752, when England adopted the new calendar, customarily carried two dates, one OS, or Old Style, the other NS, or New Style. So this double dating and the different dates between different countries is something to bear in mind when you're researching records of different countries between the years of 1582 and 1752, as well as taking into account the fact that the new calendar year didn't start on the 1st of January, it started on Lady Day, the 25th of March. Oh boy, lots to take into account. Now, a piece of trivia for you. The Orthodox churches still celebrate Easter according to the Julian calendar because changing it to the Gregorian calendar would mean that it would sometimes coincide with the Jewish Passover. Now, here in Spain, I will be celebrating Easter Sunday 2020 on the 12th of April, whereas my son in Russia with the Orthodox Church will be celebrating it on the 19th of April, so I'll have to wish him happy Easter on a totally different weekend. But perhaps I should use this as an excuse to celebrate Easter twice and to have two lots of Easter eggs. That sounds great, don't you think?
Boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy. So you could have two different dates in the same geographical location. Just a border dividing you can have, between the years of 1582 and 1752, you can have completely different historical records. Imagine how confusing and difficult it is to try to do historic research, and you have to comb through the archives and then now make the determination between OS, or Old Style, and NS, which is New Style, or just having two separate dates for the same event, the same historical event, but having two separate dates. How confusing is that, right? Keep that in mind when you do your research. You shouldn't have to do that because the Most High's calendar is perfect. It doesn't require two different dates. It doesn't require you to take stuff out and put stuff in. It is as it is, and it is in alignment with the scriptures. I don't get it. But did you hear what she said at the end about Easter? Now, I'm not endorsing Easter by any means. I just thought that it was funny, and her take and interpretation and course of action is very similar to a lot of you guys who use a pagan calendar, an incorrect pagan calendar, to keep the Most High's feast days. She said that she was keeping Easter on April 10th, right? And her son, who lives in Russia, was keeping it because according to Russia and their time frame and everything like that, was keeping it on the 19th. So her answer was, man, I have to wish my son Easter on a completely different weekend, right? That was the first thing. Second thing, she's like, well, maybe I should just keep Easter twice. What? Now Easter is already pagan and wrong anyway, but if you're of the understanding and mindset that Easter is legit, what sense does that make to celebrate Easter twice? That just boggles my mind. And so I asked the question to those who keep Saturday Sabbath. If you were lost in the wilderness with no form of technology or no way to know what day it was, maybe you passed out, maybe you were out at sea and you washed up on some days later on the shore and you didn't know what day it was, how would you keep the Most High's calendar? The only answer you could potentially give outside of I don't know is whatever day I wake up, I'll keep that as day one, and then I'll count 6 days. And on the seventh day, I would call it the Sabbath and observe that as the Sabbath. But is that true? Is that correct? Because does the Bible not state that new moon begins your month? See what I'm saying? That would be incorrect. You wouldn't be keeping the correct calendar. If you woke up, if you washed up on a shore on a Wednesday and you counted 6 days and then on the seventh day you kept the Sabbath, there would be another Wednesday. That's not Saturday according to your understanding, so wrong. Does that line up with the Most High calendar? No, so that's also wrong. It doesn't make any sense. However, if you use the Most High's calendar, which he put in the firmament that no man can touch or alter, you would always know when the Sabbath is. Just look up at the sky. But hey, that's neither here nor there. Let's wrap this up. Check out this last little part from this historian talking about the actual Luni-Solar from a secular historical perspective.
The early Roman calendar was such a lunar solar calendar. The Romans tried to synchronize the months with the first crescent moon following a new moon, resulting in some months of 29 days and some months more. They then used intercalation to sync the calendar. Every other year they would shorten February and add a leap month, or intercalaris. The process is still the reason that February has 28 days on the modern calendar. Roman debts were typically due on the first of each month, called the calendae, and payments were tracked in a ledger book called the calendarium, which is the genesis of the term calendar. But the process was still imperfect, adding approximately 4 days every 4 years too much to be in line with the solar year. And of course, over time that would show as the calendar would no longer be in sync with the seasons. Remembered. So there's archaeological evidence that people had methods of keeping time based on the lunar cycles as far back as the Neolithic period. In 2013, archaeologists discovered a group of pits in Aberdeenshire in England that appear to correspond with the phases of the moon that dates back some 10,000 years and may be the world's oldest known lunar calendar, although there is some dispute over that claim. As the phases of the moon are easy to observe, they serve as an effective method of tracking time, and lunar calendars are still used today by some cultures to determine religious holidays. And while it makes sense to track time based on the phases of the moon, there is a problem, as the moon is not in sync with the sun, and thus 12 lunar periods is only 354 days, well short of a solar year, the period of time required for the Earth to make one complete revolution around the sun. The problem is that tracking time by the moon means that lunar months will cycle through the seasons, making a lunar calendar a poor tool regarding one of the most important reasons to track months: agriculture. The problem is usually addressed through a process called intercalation, in which additional days are added in order to sync a lunar calendar with the seasons. Since a solar year does not include a whole number of lunar months, most so-called Luni-Solar calendars count 12 lunar months as a year, but add an additional month every 2 or 3 years in order to resync the calendar with the seasons, and thus different years will have different numbers of days.
So, did you see what he said? He said they were keeping the Luni-Solar, or a form of the Luni-Solar, dating all the way back to an age that was super ancient. You know why? Because the original calendar was Luni-Solar. The Most High instituted a Luni-Solar calendar. So all of the ancient civilizations kept a Luni-Solar calendar. And over the time, they just evolved to whatever renditions that surrounded their culture, their belief system, the gods they worshipped, and all of that stuff. You know, Egypt did their own thing. Babylon did their own thing. Rome did their own thing. Everybody just evolved into their own thing, but originally it was Luni-Solar. The Roman calendar isn't one calendar. The Roman calendar is a series of calendars that was instituted in the 700s or 7th century BC, all the way to 46 BC until the Julian calendar was instituted. But all of those calendars and fluctuations and variants, they originated as a luni-solar calendar. That should tell you something. Even the pagan Roman society knew that timekeeping had something to do with the lunar cycles. And lastly, I'll end with this. Earlier, I said the Most High calendar doesn't require taking anything out or adding anything in. Now, the Luni-Solar, according to this historian, said that you're required to add a 13th month every 2 to 3 years. That isn't a man's attempt to make it work, right? Like these Gregorians and Julians and days being switched and adding 10, 11 days, whatever. It's not that. It's literally in the scriptures. It's simple. The sun is faster than the moon. The moon moves 10 days slower than the sun each year, total of 10 days. You can find this in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you can find this in the Book of Enoch. It is scriptural based. It is in the scriptures. So this isn't man trying to do something and make edits and all of that. No, it's literally in the scriptures. The lunar year is 354 days. The solar year is 364 days. So the lunar year is 10 days shorter than the solar year. So therefore, 10 days each year, which will equate to 30 days in 3 years, which would be an additional month, or what's called the 13th month, is added every 3 years to bring the lunar cycle and the solar cycle together in completeness. Because if you go to the origin of the Luni-Solar calendar, which is Genesis chapter 1, you find in verse 14, it says that the Most High made the sun and the moon and the stars for signs, seasons, days, and years. His entire calendar is located in Genesis chapter 1. If you want any more information on the Luni-Solar calendar, be sure to comment below, and I'll leave a lot of Luni-Solar calendars. You should see them all around here when this video gets close to ending. But with that being said, family, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, link up. We can get in the scriptures. I can show you. I'm very passionate about this topic because the Sabbath was the only day in the history of anything that the Most High hallowed and said to keep it holy. Okay, it's the only day that He said it. So it's the foundation of everything. All the feast days, everything is built upon the Sabbath, and you can't keep the Sabbath correctly if you're on the wrong calendar. So with that being said, like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, make sure you hit that bell so you get a notification every time we drop a new video. And in about 30 minutes, get ready for Shabbat talk. I appreciate you, family. Shalom.
It's lonely at the peak, had to work to get on top. I'm a student of the craft, work for everything I got. Elevating my mentality, still ain't in my prime. But the ones who reach the top don't appreciate the climb. I bled for this path as I stand on the pinnacle, delivering the scriptures in a way that's very lyrical. Bars on the summit, I'm so high above the ground. Cause when you at the top, it's nothing to do but look down. This rap shit my kingdom, that's why I'm a monument. Saying I'm the best, it's almost not a compliment. Who your favorite artist? They can't match my confidence.